Good day everyone, I am Claveria Maria Eileen
I am Joan Fontanil.
I'm Princess Henteroy.
My name is Alvin C. Magpantay.
My name is Ruby Rose Terrones.
and we are the group 5. We will discuss the chapter 9, the literary masterpiece of Dr. Jose Rizal. So the objectives are to define the Philippine history, state the reason of Dr. Jose Rizal in making his annotation, discuss Morgan's point of view about the colonizers, and reason out if the Philippines would be a Spanish colony or not, draw a brief parallel between the political situation then and the situation at the present, and organize the advantages and disadvantages of the country being denied representation in the courts, and discuss the influences of the writing of Dr. Jose Rizal in the youth of today. Dr. Jose Rizal, so his full name is Jose Protasio Rizal Mercado y Alonso Riolonda. He was born on June 19, 1861 in Calamba, Laguna, and died on December 30, 1896 in Manila at the age of 35. He was a patriot, physician, and a man of letters who was an inspiration to the Philippine nationalist movement. In 1887, Rizal published his first novel, Noli Me Tangere, The Social Cancer, or in English, Touch Me Not. It is a passionate exposure of the evils of the Spanish rule in the Philippines, and a sequel, El Filibusterismo in 1891, or The Reign of the Grid, that established his reputation as a leading spokesman of the Philippine Reform movement. Rizal became the leader of the propaganda movement and contributed numerous articles to its newspaper called La Solidaridad, which was published in Barcelona. So Rizal returned in Philippines in 1892. He founded Non-Violent Reform Society, the La Liga Pilipina, in Manila. He was deported and defeated in Northwest Mindanao, and he remained in exile for the next 4 years. In 1896, the Katipunan, a Filipino nationalist secret society, revolted against Spain. Although he had no connection with that organization and had no part in the insurrection, Rizal was arrested and tried for sedition by the military. Found guilty, he was publicly executed by a firing squad in Manila. His martyrdom convinced Filipinos that there was no alternative to independence from Spain. On the eve of his execution, while confined in Fort Santiago, Rizal wrote Mi Ultimo Adios, or Last Farewell in English. It is a masterpiece of 19th century Spanish verse. The death of Rizal sprang awareness and brought to a revolt. So after the life offering, the neighboring countries recognized Rizal as the first nationalist who hailed in the Pearl of Orient Sea. So madami mga personalities ang nagbigay ng tribute sa ating national hero. So kagaya ni Professor Ferdinand Blumentritt, ni Dr. Adolf B. Meyer na isang German director ng Dresden Museum, at ang ating resident commissioner from the Commonwealth of the Philippine Islands, si Senator Camilo Rosales, na sinabing si Rizal daw ay isang versatile genius, at madami pang ibang personality. So, bawat Pilipino ay dapat malaman ang kanyang naging contribution sa ating bansa. So, pinangarap niya na magkaroon ng equal playing field ang bawat Pilipino, maging master ng sariling bansa at maging cultivator ng mga magandang gawin. So, para kay Jose Rizal, pen is mightier than the sword. So, sa pamamagitan ng mga literary masterpiece niya, he voiced out strong opposition on the abuse of the Spaniards, and he conveyed messages that he hoped would inspire his fellow countrymen. So, sa chapter na to, i-discuss natin yung best works niya at i-uncover natin yung underlying meaning behind it. Underlying meaning behind his literature. So first is to the Filipino youth. In this poem, Rizal praised the rising generation. So this poem can be considered as Rizal's first testimony and presentation of nationalism. So in this literary piece, he clearly referred to the Philippines as his home or motherland, and his thought in this poem relates to the role of the youth in nation building. It primarily tells the importance of the youth and their capability to shape the future of our motherland. So Dr. Jose Rizal also expresses his optimism despite the turmoil that our country was in during his time. Ang piece na to ay sinabit niya sa poem contest and organized para sa mga Pilipino by the Manila Lyceum of Art and Literature, kung saan nanalo siya ng first prize at inawardan siya ng feather-shaped silver pen at diploma. So, second is Goodbye to Leonor. It was written by Rizal for his childhood sweetheart, Leonor Rivera, who was only 13 years old when they met in the Gupan. So despite the distance between them, they tried to stay in touch by sending letters and photographs to one another. But their love affair was strongly disapproved by Leonor's parents. Later on, Leonor, who was Rizal's first sweetheart for 11 years, married Henry Kipping, a British railway engineer who helped build the Manila-Dagupan railway system in 1890. This deeply saddened Rizal, and his loneliness and heartbreaking feeling resulted in this melancholic poem. The third one is To the Young Woman of Malolos. So in this letter, Rizal addresses all kinds of women, mother, wives, the singles, and expresses everything that he wishes them to keep in mind. So Rizal was greatly impressed with the fighting spirit that the young women of Malolos had shown. This letter is his own way of recognition for them as brave Filipinos who are no longer blinded by the flawed religious belief brought by the Spanish priests. So in this letter, he expresses great joy and satisfaction over the battle that he had fought. Rizal also emphasizes in this letter that his desire for women to be offered the same opportunities as those received by the men in terms of education. So education is indeed important not just for men but as well as for women, and everyone has the right to education. So under his letter, he also mentioned about our own freedom as individual human beings, that we must have our own judgment of what is right and wrong. So sa letter na to, nagbigay si Rizal ng mga important points gaya ng duties and responsibilities ng Filipino mother sa kanilang mga children, and duties and responsibilities ng wife sa kanyang husband, qualities ng Filipino mother na kailangan nilang i-possess, at counsel sa mga young women on their choice of a lifetime partner. So the fourth one is Kundiman. Rizal wrote the Kundiman in Tagalog in September 12, 1891. It is actually a traditional Filipino love song used by a young man to serenade the woman of his love. So the theme of Rizal's Kundiman is his intense love for the Philippines, his motherland, and his word reflected his optimism that Philippines will be freed from the injustice and bondage. So Rizal's nationalism did not only manifest itself in his novels and essays, but also in song. So particularly the Kundiman. So the choice of musical form was of course fitting because more than just a song about love, the Kundiman is a song about intense devotion. So in the melancholic Kundiman of Rizal, he deplored the country's state of oppression in the hands of the colonizer. So, however, he still expressed the hope that someday the name Filipino would be admired, even if bloodshed become necessary to reach that goal. So, this song, like the novels No Limitang Hare and El Filibusterismo, was used by Spanish prosecutors to build a case against Rizal. So, in fact, the line, "Ibubuhos namin ang dugoy ibabaha," was used as evidence during his trial. The fifth one is Junto al Pasi. It is an act zarzuela in Spanish and was staged by the Academy of Spanish Literature members on December 8, 1880. So Rizal wrote it to honor Our Lady of Peace and Good Buya. So even though Rizal already graduated in Ateneo, he remained close to the Jesuits, and as the president of the Academy of Spanish Literature and through his skills in writing, he was asked to contribute to the celebration of the Feast of Immaculate Conception, their college patron. So from there, Rizal wrote Junto al Pasi. The sixth one is No Limitang Hare. It is his first novel that was published in 1887. It is a searing indictment of the clerical abuse as well as the colonial rule's shortcomings. It played a crucial role in the Philippine history, and it is considered as one of the most valuable literature in the Philippine literature. So sinulat niyo to para isiwalat yung mga paghihirap ng mga Pilipino sa kamay ng mga Espanyol. And 7 is the El Filibusterismo. Ito yung second novel written by Jose Rizal. Ito yung sequel ng No Limitang Hare. So, tulad ng No Limitang Hare, sinulat din to sa Spanish. So, ang English nito is The Reign of the Greed. That consists of 38 chapters. So, dinedicate ni Rizal ang El Filibusterismo sa tatlong paring martir na tinatawag na gombursa. Last one is Mi Ultimo Adios. In English is My Last Farewell. It's a poem written by Rizal before his execution by firing squad on December 30, 1896. O sinulat niya to on his final days in the Fort of Santiago. So ito yung nagsilbing huling pamaalam niya sa kanyang motherland at sa kanyang kapwa Pilipino. So this piece was one of the last note he wrote before his death. So sa tulong ni Rizal, naging kilala ang Pilipinas sa ibang mga bansa. So siya ay tinitingala dahil sa mga contributions na nabigay niya sa ating bansa. Contemporary literature in the Philippines during and after the propagandist era. So, yung mga sumusunod ay mga proof of excellence in historical Filipino literature noong panahon ng Spanish. So, first, Antonio Abad, 1894 to 1970. So, yung mga writings niya ay nakasulat in native language, Cebuano at Spanish. So, isa siya sa mga leading contributors ng Filipino Hispano literature during his time. So, he produced novels and plays na nag-criticize the mga occupation of the island of the Americans. So, his works would later be known as the part of the golden age of the Phil-Hispanic literature noong 1898 hanggang 1941. So, ang kanyang mga literary works ay una, El Ultimo Romantico noong 1928, La Oveja Dinita noong 1929, El Campeón, La Vida Secreta de Daniel España noong 1960. So, yung unang dalawang works niya ay nanalo ng Premyo Sobel. Ang Premyo Sobel ay Philippine Literary Award na kinakonfer sa mga Filipino writers in Spanish language. So, binuo yun para ma-promote yung best writing na ginawa ng mga Filipino writers or authors in Spanish language. So, ayun yung tinuturing na oldest literary award in the Philippines. So, third one is Rosauro Almario. So, pinanganak siya noong taong 1886 at namatay noong 1933. Editor siya ng daily newspaper na tinatawag na Pagkakaisa at later on naging general manager ng La Opinion newspaper. So, among his works bilang writer ay ang Tagalog language essay entitled Ano ang Ligaya sa Ibabaw ng Lupa? In English, What is the Happiness on the Surface of Earth na sinulat niya noong 1907. Meron siyang award-winning Spanish language essay na pinamagatang Que es Pueblo or What is Town in English. So, meron din siya mga novels. And noong 1910, may dalawa siyang novels na entitled Pinatatawad na Kita or You Are Forgiven in English at Ang Mananayaw or The Dancer. So, noong 1911, meron din siyang novel. Ang title is Ang Mga Anak Bukid or The Children of the Farmlands at Ang Dahon Nagluluksa or The Grieving Lands noong 1912 nang si Eva ay likain or When Eve Was Created noong 1913. So, the fourth one is Oldario A. Aviola. So, pinanganak siya noong taong 1883 at namatay noong 1966. So, he was a Filipino-Visayan novelist, one of the most important Cebuano language writers. So, kabilang sa kanyang mga pseudonyms ay Artagnan, Sikatuna at M. Annabel. So, siya ang editor ng Ang Suga Magazine in Cebu Normal University at iba pang mga publication na nakasulat in Spanish language. So, ang ilan sa mga works niya ay ang Pelicitas, Ang Gugma sa Lalaki, Gumaran sa Kinabuhi noong 1934. So, the fifth one is Cecilio Apostol. He was born on November 22, 1877 and died on September 8, 1930. So, he was a Filipino poet and a poet laureate. The pseudonym on his work at the La Independencia under Antonio Luna was Catulio. So, yung mga poems niya ay ginamit once para magturo ng Spanish language sa lahat ng mga universities and colleges sa Pilipinas under the Republic Act Number 1881. Number 6, Lourdes Castrillo Brillantes. He was a prominent Filipino writer in the Spanish language. Isang professor at nanalo siya ng Premio Sobel noong 1998 sa kanyang work na entitled 81 del Premio Sobel or 81 years of the Premio Sobel. His work put legacy of Filipino literature in the Spanish language and the Tesoro Literario de Pilipinas, a compilation of Filipino short stories written in the 20th century. Siya ay professor ng European languages sa University of the Philippines at contributor sa kronika ng Manila Chronicles. Number 7, Edmundo Parolian. So, nakareceive siya ng highest literary honor in Spanish writing noong 1892 bilang leading authority in Spanish literature and languages. Siya ang senior correspondent for the Real Academia de la Lengua Española in the Philippines. Nakapag-publish siya ng several books of poetry, anthologies, textbooks, and translation. So, ilan sa mga writing niya ay Lubias Pilipinas noong 1967, The Rhythm of Despair noong 1974, Gramatica y Practica noong 1979, Don Segundo Sombra noong 1979, Literatura Phil-Hispana noong 1980 at Espanyol para sa Universitarios Filipinos noong 1981. Number 8, Guillermo Gomez Rivera. Pinanganak siya noong 1936 at nagsusulat na siya ng same theme more thoroughly about the decadence of the country's Hispanic soul. So, but his style is often combative and tends to lay blame for the near demise of the Spanish language. So he identifies his strange hold as the cause of the moral and economic impoverishment of the Philippines and the loss of the Spanish language. So he was articulated in fairy essays, short stories, and poems written in various Filipino languages, as well as in English and Spanish. So yung organizers ng Premio Nobel in awarding him the prize in 1975 cited his effort to preserve the Spanish language and culture in our country. Number 9 is Fernando Maria Guerrero. So, pinanganak siya noong 1873 at namatay noong June 12, 1929. So, at a young age, nagsusulit na siya ng literature. Nag-excel siya sa Facility of Language and obtained his Bachelor of Arts degree from the Ateneo Municipal de Manila and the Bachelor of Laws degree at the University of Santo Tomas. Nagsulat siya ng journals during the years 1898 hanggang 1900. So, apart from Spanish, nagkasalita din siya ng Latin and Greek, and he was an editor of the papers El Renacimiento or the Renaissance, La Vanguardia or the Outer Works, and La Opinion, the Opinion. So, noong 1914, nag-publish siya ng poetry book na Crisalidas. At subsequently, he published another verse compilation called Abe's E. Flores. So, kahit namatay na si Guerrero, ay nag-iwan siya ng poem na nagbigay ng high of praise para sa mga Spaniards. Ang title nun is To Spain or E. Hispania. Graciano Lopez Haino. So, pinanganak siya in the year 1856 at namatay noong 1896. So, he is remembered for his literary contribution to the propaganda movement. So, siya yung nagtayo ng fortnightly newspaper, La Solidaridad or Solidarity. Number 11, Apolinario Mabini. Pinanganak siya noong 1856 at namatay noong 1896. Siya ay Filipino political philosopher and architect of Philippine Revolution. He formulated the principles of a democratic popular government, endowing the historical struggles of the Filipino people with a coherent ideological orientation. 12 is Jose Palma, a famous poet who wrote the lyrics of the Philippine National Anthem. 13, Marcelo H. Del Pilar, pinanganak noong 1850 at namatay noong 1896. So, he advanced the goals of the propaganda movement to reform the colonial government, curb the powers and abuses of the Spanish friars, obtain equal rights between the Spaniards and Filipinos, and provide Philippine representation in the Spanish courts. 14, Claro M. Recto, so born on 1890 and died on 1960. He was a Philippine nationalist leader and president of the 1934 Constitutional Convention. He was one of the most vocal advocates of the Philippine autonomy and social autonomy. And 15, Jose Rizal, 1861 to 1896. So he was a patriot, physician, and a man of letters who was an inspiration to the Philippine nationalist movement. So, ang evolution ng literature has been flourished and continued to spread all over the Philippines. So, among the most and famous Filipino contributors are first Bob Ong. So, he is a pseudonym of an anonymous Filipino contemporary author known for using conversational Filipino to create humorous and reflective depiction of life as a Filipino. So, the sixth book has an element of comedy that replicate the Filipino culture and tradition, and it surpassed millions of copies. So, the works were considered as true Filipino classics, and the wisdom was truly a reflection of the real Filipino culture. Second is Francisco Balagtas. He was a prominent Filipino poet under the pen name Francisco Balagtas E. de la Cruz. So he is widely considered as the Tagalog contemporary of William Shakespeare in Filipino literature. So he is famous in Balagtasan. Ang Balagtasan ay debate in extemporaneous verses. So natuto siya ng magsulat ng poetry mula kay Jose de la Cruz or Joseng Sisiw. Si Joseng Sisiw ay isa sa mga famous poets sa Tondo. So, challenge siya ni Joseng Sisiw para ma-improve yung writing niya. So, in 1835, Balagtas moved to Pandacan where he met Maria Asuncion Rivera, who would effectively serve as the muse for his future works. So, the most epic Florante at Laura depict his real life. He finally published Florante at Laura upon his release in 1838. So he moved to Bataan in 1840 where he served as the assistant to the Justice of Peace and later in 1856 as the Major Lieutenant. So he was also appointed as the translator of the court. He was labeled as the Prince of the Tagalog Poets. Third is Francisco Sionil Jose. So isa siya sa mga widely read Filipino writers sa English language. So ang novels niya and short stories ay nagdedepict ng social underpinnings of class struggles at colonialism in Filipino society. So ang mga works niya ay written in English at nagkaroon translation sa 20 languages kabilang ang Korean, Indonesian, Russian, Latvian, Ukrainian, and so the fourth one is Lolhati Bautista, was one of the foremost Filipino female novelists in the history of contemporary Philippine literature. So mga novels niya ay dekada 70 or decade 70, Bata-Bata Paano Ka Ginawa, Child, How Were You Made, and Gapo, short name for Olongapo, Philippines. So, bukod sa pagiging novelist, siya din ay movie and television screenwriter and short story writer. So, ang first screenplay niya ay Sakada, Seasonal Sugarcane Workers, na isinulat noong 1975 that exposed the plight of Filipino peasant. So, naka-receive siya ng recognition from the Philippine Don Carlos Palanca Memorial Awards for Literature and surian ng Wikang Pambansa in 1987. So, meron siyang award-winning screenplay na Bulaklak City Jail, Kumahawi Man ng Ulap, at Sex Object ng 1985. So, siya ay honored and recognized by the Ateneo Library of Women's Writing during the 8th Annual Lecture on Vernacular Literature noong March 10, 2004. Noong 2005, the Feminist Continental Film Festival presented her with a recognition award for her outstanding achievement in screenplay writing. Noong 2006 ay naging recipient siya ng Diwata Award for the Best Writer of the 16th International Women's Film Festival of the UP Film Center. She was also the only Filipino included in a book on the foremost international women writers published in Japan noong 1991. So, the fifth one is Nick Joaquin. His father was Colonel Leocadio under the supervision of General Emilio Aguinaldo during the 1896 revolution, and his mother was a teacher, Salome Marquez, who taught English and Spanish. So he hailed in Paco, Manila, and was allowed to read poems and stories by his mother. His father enjoyed reading with him in the National Library of the Philippines, and after the revolution, his father was successfully practicing as a lawyer. He then developed his interest in writings. So in the beginning, he worked as a proofreader. At the age of 17, he wrote and published a section of pre-World War II Tribune under the supervision of Serapin Lanot, a writer and editor. So Joaquin deeply admired Dr. Jose Rizal, the national hero of the Philippines, and he translated the hero's valedictory poem in the original Spanish, Mi Ultimo Adios, as The Land That I Love, Farewell, as proof for his administration. So he paid tribute in honor to Dr. Jose Rizal on the following. First, the storyteller's new medium, Rizal in Saga. Second, the complete poems and plays of Jose Rizal. And third, the question of heroes, essay in criticism on 10 key figures of the Philippine history. Sixth is Gilba Olvidado. He was a popular Filipino novelist and writer known for her extraordinary love stories. Naging famous siya during the 1970s with her remarkable novels Sinasamba Kita, or I Worship You in English, Babangon Ako Tududugin Kita, Sweet Revenge. She also wrote screenplays that later turned into blockbusters such as Saan Nagtatago Ang Pag-ibig, or Where Is Love Hiding, which made her rise into the popularity after the Filipino Academy of Movie Arts and Sciences recognized it as the best story. 7 is Louis Margang Cuanco. He published his debut novel entitled Orasa Nakpil Malate at the age of 18. So, yung novel na yun ay illustrate yung pink culture industries of Orasa and Nakpil, which is known as the haven of gay Filipino culture. So, the novel became an instant hit, becoming a bestseller months after it was released. Noong August 2006, Siya ay inawardan ng Idol Award, Youth Idol Award by the Studio 23s. And a month after, the Sentro ng Wikang Pilipino conferred ay sertipiko ng pagpapahalaga por orasan na Pil Malate. So, yung pinakamunal novel niya ay nag-endorse ng prominent people and institution including the multi-awarded director Jose Javier Joey Reyes, Dr. Jaime Galvestan, a former DOH Secretary, and Dr. Raul Destura of the National Institutes of Health Philippines. It is Mars Rebelo. He was a comic strip creator and writer who became phenomenal in the Philippines where he created superheroes. So, ang Darna, a Filipino version of Wonder Woman, Jezebel, Name of the Filipino Mermaid, Heroine, and many others ay kabilang sa kanyang mga nagawa. During his time, the golden age of comics flourished. Like Carlo J. Caparas, Mars Rebelo creations and writings were turned into films and become box office hit during the 1960s to the 1980s. So, Rebelo was one of the highest paid comic writer during his time. Until now, his creation is still influential to the Philippine contemporary literature. So, number 9, and the last one is Carlo J. Caparas. So, kagaya ni Mars Rebelo, siya ay comic strip creator, writer, director, and producer who becomes sensationally known for his created local superheroes and comic books. Characters that are still popular to the Filipinos until now. So, some of these creations turned Filipino icons such as Panday, a blacksmith hero, and many others. So, bilang producer and director, nag-produce siya ng box office movies based on the comics and true-to-life stories and crimes. So, in 2009, he received National Artist Award granted by the President of the Philippines.
Successos de las Islas Filipinas. It tackles the history of the island Philippines. It covered 1493 to 1603, from the first Datus, the king of colonizers, and the discovery of the island from 1565. It describes the strength and weaknesses of the policies of the government, describes the true historic spirit and various events that occurs in the island.
Dr. Jose Rizal's Annotation to Morga's 1609 Philippine History. Dr. Jose Rizal made clarification on the observation made by Dr. Morga in his manuscript. Si Gobernador Antonio de Morga ay hindi lamang ang unang nagsulat kundi ang unang naglathala ng kasaysayan ng Pilipinas. The title of the book, written by Dr. Antonio de Morga, is Successos de las Islas Filipinas. So the annotations of Dr. Morga's work, it is one of the most important works on the early history of the Spanish colonialization of the Philippines. Na-publish siya noong 1609.
Noli Me Tangere or Touch Me Not. It is a novel published in 1887, originally written in Spanish. It is a sweeping and passionate unmasking of the brutality and corruption of Spanish rule in the Philippines, year of 1565 to 1898. The plot revolves around Crisostomo Ibarra, migrant heir of a wealthy clan, returning home after 7 years in Europe, and filled with ideas on how to better the lot of his countrymen. Striving for reforms, he is confronted by an abusive ecclesiastical hierarchy and the Spanish civil administration, by turns indifferent and cruel. The novel suggests, through plot developments, that meaningful change in this context is exceedingly difficult, if not impossible. El Filibusterismo. It is the second novel written by Jose Rizal as the sequel to Noli Me Tangere. Like Noli Me Tangere, it was written in Spanish, the Reign of Greed in English. It consists of 38 chapters dedicated to the three martyred price of Cavite Mutiny. The execution of the three prize was significant to the title of the novel.
Hi everyone. Philippines, a Century Hence. Part 1. It was originally entitled Pilipinas Dentro de Cien Años. First published in La Solidaridad in Madrid at September 30, 1899 to February 1, 1890. Charles E. Derbyshire translated it in English. It is an essay wrote by Jose Rizal pertaining of what could happen to the Philippines 100 years. In order to read the destiny of a people, it is necessary to open the book of its past. He is not actually prospering. Instead, he was telling in his article was but an analysis. Rizal just carefully observed the present and past situation of our dear motherland and from then predicted our future. Possible reasons of Rizal upon writing this essay. Instilling fear on the current regime of Spanish tyranny for them to fly away from the country. Second, expressing sadness and failure that even if Spain let loose hold the Philippines, there will be other countries in the world that are ready to take hold of our country. Third, Rizal was giving a hint of hope to the Filipinos that sooner or later, a great nation will save their country from the oppressive rule of Spain. Part 2. Rizal answered the questions, what will become of the Philippines within a century? Rizal discussed first the history of Malayan Filipinos. Rizal stated the Spain took advantage the discord on our land and present them as peacemaker after to dominate both parties. He subject them to his authority. Some issues that concerns our country. Spain's implementation of her military policies. The Philippine population decreased dramatically. Poverty became more rampant than ever, and the farmlands were left to wither. The lack of freedom of the press. Rizal stated that the Philippines will remain under Spanish domination, but with more law and greater liberty, or they were declared themselves independent after stepping themselves and the more country in blood. In his essay, we see his urge to put freedom in our land through peaceful negotiations with the Spanish government.
What risk does the Spanish government see in the new parliamentarians? One of the three things: either they will prove unruly, become political dreamers, or act properly. The insult is a great for the Philippines, but is still greater for Spain, that all representative would be separatist. If the real objection of the Filipino delegates is that they smell like egrots, then Don Sebinibaldo, they must come affirm that they will smell at worst like powder. And if they swear at all, the Filipinos who are their own country were our costume to bat every day may give up such dirty costume, at least during the legislative session. It is useless to answer certain objections of some fine writers regarding the rather brown skins and faces of Europeans. Questions of taste are particular to each race. By their institutions, many malcontents would be silenced, and instead of blaming its troubles upon the government, the country would bear them better. We are not sure that we serve the true interests of our country by asking for representatives. We know that the lack of enlightenment, indolence, and egoism of our fellow countrymen may convert reform into a harmful instrument. But we wish to be loyal to government, and its efforts may not come to grief. There is no plausible reason why the ignorant and defective should be denied representation. They are the very ones who most need it. It is plural to fear that independence may come through them. The free press will keep the government in touch with public opinion, and the representative will be their hostage. When laws and attacks and acts of officials are kept under surveillance, the word justice may cease to be a colonial jest. Justice is the foremost virtue of the civilizing races. It subdues the barbarous nations, while injustice erodes the weakest in the men. Offices and trust should be awarded by competition, publishing work and judgment, so that there may be stimulus and that discontent may not breed. Colonialism should be practiced in a similar way as it is in the colonies. Colonizers ought to be upright, honest, and intelligent, just as a man simulates virtues when he deals with strangers. The offices held by the native will merely serve to ensure the Spanish domination. We could add other minor reforms touching commerce, agriculture, security of the individual, and property, education, and so on. But these are points which shall deal in the other articles. For the present, we are satisfied with the outlines, and no one can say that we ask too much. What is utopia? Utopia was currently imagined by Thomas More, wherein existed universal suffrage, religious tolerations, almost complete abolitions of death penalty, and so on. When the book was published, these things were looked upon as dreams, impossibilities, that is, utopianism. The question has been raised in the English Parliament of giving representations to the Crown colonies. Only Spain, which in the 16th century was the model nation in civilizations, lagged far behind. Cuba and Puerto Rico, whose inhabitants do not number a third of those of the Philippines, have numerous representatives. The Philippines will remain a part of Spain if they enter upon the life of law and civilization, if the rights of their inhabitants are respected, if the liberal policy of the government is carried out without trickery or menace, without subterfuges or false interpretations. If an attempt is made to see in the island a load to be exploded, a resource to satisfy ambitions, thus to relieve the sovereign country of taxes, killing the goose that lays the golden eggs, then it will be impossible to hinder the operations of laws of history. Close indeed are the bonds that unite us to Spain. Mutual sacrifices and benefits have endeared affection. Machiavelli said, La natura degli umani e così obligarsi per li beneficiari se ci esi fano. Camper Kelly Share Sivano, it is human nature to be bound as much by benefits conferred as those received. There is no claim of gratitude that can excuse offenses against the liberty of the individual, against the sanity of home and the laws. Spain cannot claim, not even the name of God Himself, that 6 million of people should be brutalized, exploited, and oppressed. There is no divinity that can proclaim the sacrifice of our dearest affection. The noble Spanish people, jealous of its rights and liberties, cannot be hid. Filipinos renounce theirs. A Filipino that prides itself on the glories of its past cannot ask another to accept objection and dishonor its own name. If violence were silences as we have in misfortune to fall, which is possible, for we are mortal, then we do not know what course will be taken by the numerous tendencies that will rush to occupy the places that we leave vacant. Winston Churchill. There are few examples in history of a long-lasting domination exercised by one people another. One of the two had to yield and succumb, as happened in the case of the Carthaginians, the Moors of the French in Spain, or else these autochthones had to give way and perish. But even though the conquerors lived in the country conquered, even though the peninsula was broken up to small states, which gradually emerged like little islands in the midst of the great Saracen inundations, and in spite of the chivalrous spirit, the gallantry, the religious toleration of the caliphs, they were finally driven out after the bloody and stubborn conflicts which formed the Spanish nation and created the Spain of the 15th and 16th century. The existence of a foreign body within another's window, with strength and activity, is contrary to all natural and ethical laws. Science teaches us that it either assimilated, destroys, is eliminated, or becomes insisted. This part of organism and must be removed for destroy. Insistment of a conquering people is impossible, for it signifies complete isolation, absolute inertia, debility in the conquering element, and leads to the tomb of the foreign invader. Someday the Philippines will fatality inability declare themselves independent from Spain. To this law of destiny can be opposed neither Spanish patriotism nor the love of the Filipinos for Spain. The doubtful future of disembarkment and strife in the islands themselves is cast into doubt. We have said, and statistics prove that it is impossible to exterminate the Filipino people, even if it were possible. What interest would Spain have in the destruction of the inhabitants of country she cannot populate or cultivate? What good would Philippines be without our Filipinos? Quite otherwise. Under her colonial system and the transitory character of the Spaniards who go to the colonies, a colony is so much the more useful and productive to her as it possesses inhabitants and wealth. Moreover, in order to destroy the 6 million Malays, even supposing them to be in the infancy, that they have never learned to fight and defend themselves, Spain would have to sacrifice at least part of her population. This we command of notice of the partisans of colonial exploitation. The menace is that when education and liberty necessary to human existence are denied by the Spain to Filipinos, then they will seek enlightenment abroad behind the mother country's back. The opposition of our blind and paratic politicians will be futile but even prudential because it will convert motive for love and gratitude into resentment and hatred. It is to be expected that the government will triumph and be generally, as is the custom, severe in punishment. Winston Churchill, an avoidable contaminant for those catastrophes in the accumulation of acts of injustice committed against the innocent and peaceful inhabitants. A chasm of blood then opened between the two peoples, that the wounded and the afflicted, instead of becoming fewer, are increased. Note, 2. That its severe measures are dangerous in a nation made up of a homogeneous population. The peril is increased 100-fold when the government is formed for a praise different from the governed. To the families and friends of the guilty, who always think the punishment excessive and the judge unjust, must be added the families of the innocent, who see no advantage in living submissively and peacefully. In a country dominated by a foreign race, even the justest act of severity is construed as injustice and oppression because it's ordered by a foreigner who is a sympathetic or is an enemy of the country. In the former, an injustice may still be ascribed to one man alone, to a governor actuated by personal malice, and with the death of the tyrant, the victim is reconciled to the government of his nation. Government regards and colonies in general and our colonial office as training schools and contributes notably to the fulfillment of the great law that colonies sooner or later declare themselves independent.
So that ends our report. Thank you for watching.